Wife's BFF tries to seduce me after getting divorced and I immediately let my wife know about it, but she begins laughing at me and questioning my masculinity for not taking it playfully. So I'm dumbfounded because IDK where this is coming from until I overhear these convo between her and BFF and realize my wife's getting brainwashed into accepting an open marriage after her BFF failed her own marriage. Now she's the one who has nowhere to go and is begging me for a second chance. My wife, Kate, has a best friend, Sandra, with whom she shares a uniquely close bond. They both call each other sisters. Their friendship began back in college where they met and quickly became inseparable even after they graduated as life grew busier with jobs, relationships, responsibilities. Kate and Sandra remained a significant part of each other's lives, never letting distance or time diminish the bond they shared. When Kate and I first began dating, she was upfront about Sandra's importance in her life. She would often speak of Sandra with such warmth and respect that it was easy to see just how much her friend meant to her. Kate always made it clear that for our relationship to flourish, I would need to make a strong impression on her best friend and sort of get her acceptance. The first time I met Sandra, I wanted to make sure that she knew I respected her friendship with Kate. So along with the bouquet I brought for Kate, I also picked up a second bouquet for Sandra as a friendly gesture. When I presented the flowers to Sandra, she started awing and seemed genuinely touched by my gesture. During our conversation, she seemed to warm up to me fairly quickly, and by the end of the evening, I knew I had her approval. Kate seemed really happy to see me and her best friend get along. However, I will say that I did notice a few red flags. For example, Sandra loved talking about only herself. She seldom asked any questions or let anybody else speak. It was like she loved only hearing her own loud voice. If me and Kate even looked at each other or held hands, Sandra would snatch her hands away from me and joke about how I should remain a gentleman as if holding hands with my girlfriend was somehow inappropriate. At one point, when Kate was bragging about how good of a boyfriend I was to her, Sandra joked how Kate should probably break up with me so Sandra could have me instead. She did laugh while making this joke and Kate didn't seem to mind about her comment, but it made me feel a bit weird. However, I didn't want to overthink and create any issues since my only goal was to earn Kate's best friend's approval for a smoother path in our relationship. What I didn't realize back then was that this first meeting with Sandra, which seemed like such a simple and positive experience, would actually set off a chain of events I couldn't have predicted. I don't mean to sound presumptuous, but looking back, Sandra may have had an interest in me right from the start beyond just friendship. For years, I have always brushed this thought aside, dismissing it as my own misinterpretation of her friendliness. After all, I never had any romantic interest in Sandra. My love and devotion were and still are entirely for Kate. Yet as time passed, Sandra's actions have hinted at something more. Subtle gestures, lingering looks, and the way she behaves when we are all together sometimes feels very inappropriate. For instance, before Sandra ever got married, she would often insist on joining Kate and me on our dates, sometimes nearly every other weekend. Kate and I would plan a night out or a cozy dinner together expecting it to be just the two of us only for Sandra to somehow find a way to insert herself into the plans. It was as though she loved being a third wheel in our relationship. Of course, my wife didn't seem to mind Sandra's constant presence. In fact, she probably saw it as just another expression of their close bond. But for me, it was frustrating. I wanted to enjoy time alone with Kate, to be able to focus on her and make her feel special without distraction. But with Sandra there, my gestures towards Kate, small acts of affection like holding her chair, opening doors for her or even putting sunscreen on her at the beach seemed to take on a different dynamic. Sandra often insisted I do these things for her as well, almost as if she expected the same level of attention and care I showed Kate. Naturally, I strived to be courteous. I was raised by two older sisters who instilled in me the importance of being respectful and thoughtful towards women. However, with Sandra, it was different. She didn't simply appreciate these gestures in passing. She outright demanded or assumed I would do them for her too, as though it was my responsibility to treat her with the same affection I showed my own partner. As a result, it began to feel less like friendship and more like she was expecting me to play the role of her boyfriend, and this made me uncomfortable. When I initially went along with her requests, hoping they were just part of her outgoing personality, as Kate would often put it, over time, her behavior began to feel invasive. Sandra's expectations grew increasingly bold. I vividly recall a time when I bought a locket for Kate, a delicate piece that I had basically custom-made. She loved it and it quickly became one of her most cherished pieces of jewelry, something she wore often and kept close. However, not long after I gifted it to her, Sandra began insisting that Kate give her the necklace instead, claiming that it would suit her better. Sandra even went so far as to plant doubts in Kate's mind, subtly suggesting that because she has a cool skin tone, gold apparently doesn't look as good on such skin tones. In the end, my naive partner ended up being manipulated and reluctantly let Sandra have the necklace. When I discovered what had happened, I was deeply upset. I didn't understand how Sandra could make Kate feel insecure about something so personal, nor did I understand how she felt entitled to a gift I had thoughtfully picked out for my partner only. Feeling a surge of frustration, I confronted Kate about the necklace and firmly told her that she needed to ask her best friend to give it back. I knew Kate hadn't willingly given it up. She'd simply been persuaded, as she was a people-pleaser and likely did not want to upset her best friend. When Sandra found out that I wanted the necklace back for Kate, she refused to give it back. She had the nerve to accuse me of being disrespectful for asking her to return a gift that Kate had already given her. She claimed that she only had Kate's best interests at heart, suggesting she simply wanted my partner to look good in things that truly suited her. Her words irritated me even further. I was clear and direct with her, telling her that Kate was beautiful exactly as she was and looked good in anything she wore, gold, silver, or any other jewelry. I firmly asked Sandra to return the necklace to Kate. Sandra then made a counter-demand, suggesting that if she were to give the necklace back, I should buy her a better necklace for her upcoming birthday, insisting she deserved to be pampered as well. The entire situation felt surreal and I was taken aback by her entitlement. I reminded her that I was not her boyfriend, so maybe she should not be making such ridiculous demands to me. However, Sandra continued to insist that I was an important part of Kate's life, which meant I was an important part of her life too. So she didn't see any issue as to why I couldn't buy her a necklace. In the end, just to resolve the situation without causing more friction, I reluctantly agreed to her demand. Only then did she return Kate's necklace. This entire ordeal left a sour taste. It made me question the true nature of Sandra's intentions as well as the effect her friendship had on my wife's sense of self. If you're wondering why Kate would allow her best friend to overstep time and time again, well, that's simply who my wife is. Kate is extremely kind. She tends to see only the best in those she loves and is often willing to overlook their flaws and mistakes. When it came to Sandra, this is especially true. They have known each other for so long that their friendship was almost woven into the fabric of Kate's life, making it difficult for her to establish clear boundaries with someone who felt more like family. However, I didn't consider Sandra as my family. I hated the way she treated Kate sometimes. Kate's tendency to always forgive Sandra's behavior often led to clashes between us, as I couldn't understand why she would let her friend cross lines so often without saying anything. Over the years, I would often bring up the fact that Sandra seemed to lack respect for boundaries, especially where Kate and I were concerned. She was intrusive and inconsiderate a lot of the time. Kate would listen and always impatiently assure me that her best friend's heart was in the right place and that she would talk to her about it if her behavior bothered me so much. But obviously, Kate never quite managed to have that conversation. Confrontation just wasn't in her nature, and she always seemed to hope that things would smooth themselves out over time. As a result, Sandra continued to impose herself in our lives. When Kate and I got married, we kept things simple with a court wedding. It was a small, intimate affair, no grand ceremony. Just the two of us, along with Kate's best friend, Sandra, and my own best friend. We planned to throw a larger celebration later for our extended family and friends. But even at this modest ceremony, Sandra managed to take the attention away by showing up wearing a white mini dress. Can you believe that? Seeing Sandra in white on what was supposed to be Kate's special day shocked me. I leaned over and quietly asked Kate if she knew about Sandra's choice of attire, but she looked as surprised as I was. She approached Sandra and gently questioned her about why she had chosen to wear white. Sandra, in her usual dismissive manner, brushed off the question and claimed she didn't have anything else decent to wear, so she wore this dress. I pointed out to Sandra how only the bride was supposed to wear white. This seemed to infuriate Sandra, and she argued how it was old-fashioned to think only the bride can wear white. She insisted that she simply liked the dress and hadn't considered the color as a factor. My instinct was to ask Sandra to leave right then and there. Her disregard for such a basic wedding tradition felt to me like an intentional attempt to make herself the center of attention. But before I could say anything, Kate stepped in asking me to let it go. She explained that Sandra was her best friend and that even though her actions were questionable, she couldn't imagine our wedding day without her there. Kate's forgiveness and loyalty to Sandra were almost boundless, and once again I found myself putting aside my frustrations for her sake. Throughout our marriage, Sandra has continued to make offhanded, flirtatious comments towards me. She would compliment how great my arms look or how hot I looked in black shirts. The first few times I tried to brush them off, thinking maybe she was just overly friendly, but her behavior never seemed to change. In fact, it grew bolder over time. She once even joined my gym for a year, where she would constantly disturb me during my workouts with her petty questions. She would unnecessarily compliment my abs and get very close to me while talking. Whenever I tried to bring this up with Kate, hoping she would at least take my concerns seriously, she would just laugh, assuring me that Sandra didn't mean anything by it. To her, Sandra's comments and flirty behavior were all in good fun. Kate would often wave it off as if I was overreacting. This year, however, Sandra's behavior has gone too far. For context, she got divorced from her ex-husband after he found out that she had been having an affair with her co-worker. Her ex left her without a second thought and ensured that she wouldn't receive any alimony because of her cheating. However, while her ex had the good fortune of walking away, we, unfortunately, became the ones left dealing with the aftermath. With nowhere else to go after her divorce, Sandra convinced my wife to let her move in with us. The entire arrangement happened practically overnight without any prior discussion or planning. One evening, I came home to find Sandra's belongings in our guest room, and Kate casually informed me that Sandra would be staying with us indefinitely, or at least until she could get back on her feet. She hadn't asked me if I was okay with it, hadn't given me the courtesy of a heads up. She had just made the decision on her own. Since moving in, Sandra has shown absolutely no motivation to find a job or make any strides towards independence. Instead, she spends her days lounging at my home with my wife. Both of them are either day drinking or shopping most of the time. While I'm grateful for the stability of my current job, which affords us the lifestyle we enjoy, I can't ignore the fact that I'm effectively funding Sandra's luxuries alongside my own household. My frustration grows each month as I review our bank statements, shocked by the sheer number of expenses that are clearly unnecessary, frivolous, and outright indulgent. And it's clear a large portion of these are spent on Sandra. Whenever I bring this up with Kate, she defends Sandra, saying that her best friend is going through a tough time and needs to heal. In Kate's view, buying Sandra little gifts or covering her daily expenses is the least we could do to help her recover from her divorce. However, I can't help but feel that Sandra has been taking full advantage of both of us financially and emotionally. While Kate does things for her best friend out of love, Sandra is clearly a freeloader, happily soaking up all the benefits without contributing a thing to our household. I was still willing to keep quiet and say nothing to Sandra for the sake of my wife, but this week Sandra crossed the line and tried to seduce me. Here's what happened. My wife recently took a trip to visit her sister. This was a spontaneous trip, and she told me initially she planned to take Sandra with her. I was happy and looking forward to having the house to myself for once. After months of sharing our space with Sandra, a day alone sounded like a breath of fresh air. I planned to relax, put my feet up and binge-watch sports on TV. But on the morning they were set to leave, Sandra suddenly claimed she wasn't feeling well. She complained of nausea and fatigue, putting on a performance that apparently convinced my wife she shouldn't travel. Despite my disappointment, I didn't think much of it. People get sick, and if Sandra was feeling unwell, I couldn't exactly force her to leave. My wife, always the caretaker, asked me to check in on Sandra from time to time while she was away. She also wanted me to make sure her best friend was taking her medicine. I agreed. However, just a few hours after my wife left, Sandra's sudden illness seemed to vanish into thin air. She came out of her room wearing a short skirt and a hoodie that seemed very familiar. My eyes widened as I recognized that this was one of my old hoodies, which I didn't even wear anymore. I asked her where she found it and why she was wearing it. Sandra told me that my wife had found the hoodie in my closet and was planning to donate it. However, Sandra convinced my wife to give it to her instead, saying she thought the hoodie was really cute. I just nodded and went back to watching TV. Sandra then attempted to make small talk. I wasn't interested though, and I kept my responses short, sticking to one-word replies as I focused on the TV, hoping she'd get the hint and leave me alone. Undeterred, Sandra then sat next to me on the couch much closer than I was comfortable with. To create a barrier, I immediately placed a sofa cushion between us, hoping it would signal that I wanted space. She laughed at this, seeming amused rather than offended, and leaned toward me asking with a smirk if she was making me feel hot and uncomfortable. I looked at her disgusted and replied that I simply preferred having my personal space, adding that since she wasn't feeling well earlier, I didn't want to risk catching her germs. My hope was that this would make her realize I wasn't interested in her company, but instead Sandra laughed even more, clearly taking none of this seriously. She swung her legs up on the couch, turning her entire body to face me. Then she leaned in even closer, her gaze intense, and told me how this kind of honesty for me was what she had always loved the most about me. The casual, almost flirtatious tone made my discomfort skyrocket. It was becoming increasingly clear that she was sort of coming on to me. I kept ignoring her, hoping she would eventually take the hint and leave me alone, but Sandra wasn't letting up. She then started playing with my hair. I moved my head away and asked her clearly to leave me alone. She then smiled and replied how I should relax and enjoy the time we had, just the two of us. The situation was becoming unbearable. She was being inappropriate with me, and I did not like that. If this was a man, I would have straight up slapped him, but she was a woman and I didn't want any trouble. So I immediately got up from the couch and walked into the kitchen to gather my thoughts. Frankly, I wished my wife were here to witness this. I took out a drink from the fridge, and when I returned to the living room, Sandra started suggesting that I should ditch watching TV and come watch her instead, saying she wanted to take a dip in the pool. Then she told me with a grin how she wanted to show off her latest swimwear in front of me. At this point, my mind was racing. The reality of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. Sandra wasn't just flirting, she was basically harassing me. I could feel my frustration and anger boiling over. This wasn't a playful situation anymore. This was a violation of boundaries. I immediately grabbed my car keys and walked out of the house. I needed to get away to clear my head. I just couldn't be in the house with her anymore, knowing what had just unfolded. Currently, I'm sitting at a cafe all alone, scared to go back home. When I called Kate earlier to explain the situation and how Sandra had made me feel, she completely dismissed my worries. I thought my wife was the one person who would finally see how inappropriate and out of line Sandra was being, but Kate just laughed at my reaction. She told me how it wasn't even that serious and that I shouldn't be surprised by Sandra's harmless flirting. She insisted that I was reading too much into her friend's comments. I tried again to explain that this was different, that Sandra asking me to watch her swim or touch my hair while talking was not her usual behavior, but Kate just started to mock me, questioning my masculinity for not taking it playfully, and jokingly told me I needed to grow a pair. I was completely shocked by her reaction. So AITA for overreacting to my wife's best friends flirting with me? Am I reading too much into it? Update 1. I have to clarify, when my wife dismissed my concerns, I was completely taken aback as well. I still don't understand why my wife continues to defend Sandra's behavior so vehemently. After reading all your comments, I did call back my wife and flat out told her that I wanted Sandra out of the house. No more arguments. This was no longer just a minor issue for me. It had become a boundary violation and I couldn't ignore it anymore. Kate started begging me, telling me that Sandra had nowhere else to go and that if I kicked her out, she would be living on the streets. I told her I didn't care about where her best friend was going to live as long as she was gone from our place. In the end, Kate promised she would come home and talk to Sandra about her actions. As of now, I am back at home. I think Kate has given Sandra a heads up because she has stayed in her room and hasn't tried to disturb me again. Update 2. I can't believe this post has gone viral since I posted this yesterday. You all are right. Sandra has never really respected my personal space. It isn't just this one incident. It is the accumulation of all the little boundary-pushing moments that have happened over time. Now, after everything that has transpired, I don't know how to look at her in the same way again. I don't feel safe in my own home. As advised by some of you, I have ordered a few cameras from Amazon, so I can put them around the house like the living room and the kitchen. If Sandra tries anything on me again, then I can have evidence against her. Also, Sandra did send me a text message and an apology of sorts. Maybe Kate asked her to do this. I don't know. Sandra hasn't yet dared to face me since yesterday and has pretty much been locked inside her room. In the text message, she apologized for making me feel uncomfortable and wrote that it wasn't her intention to cause any problems. I didn't bother replying back to the text. Update 3. It's been a week since my last update. So my wife is now back home, and it seems like she and Sandra have spent a lot of time talking through what happened that day. Sandra has personally apologized to me again, but even then, I couldn't bring myself to respond. I just ignored her and let her know that she needed to move out. Kate tried to change my mind again, but I was still firm on my decision. After some back and forth, Kate suggested that I give Sandra 2 more weeks to figure things out. I agreed, but begrudgingly. However, yesterday, everything changed. I overheard something between Sandra and Kate that has now completely shifted how I view my wife and the entire situation. You see, I was out for my usual morning run, and when I came back home, I could hear Sandra and Kate talking in the living room. I generally come in through the back door every morning after my run. I guess this time they just didn't hear me. Initially, I wasn't even paying much attention to their conversation until I heard Sandra's voice clearly saying to Kate, "You're so unlucky to have an uptight husband like him." I froze when I heard that. I then heard Kate laughing like she didn't see anything wrong with what her best friend had just commented about me. Sandra then told Kate that it was going to be very difficult to convince me to agree to an open marriage setting since I was never easily swayed. I was confused when I heard that. What did they mean by open marriage? Then I heard Kate say that she wished I was more broad-minded like other men. Almost in frustration, she added that things could have been so much easier if I had just slept with Sandra when we were home alone. Sandra then jokingly told my wife that she had tried her hardest, but I just wouldn't budge. As I listened to them laugh and discuss this in such a casual manner as to what had happened that day, I quickly realized that what Sandra had done to me was something that my wife was aware of from before and had given her permission to do it. In fact, my wife knew all along that Sandra would try to seduce me while she was out of town. This was all pre-planned. My stomach churned, realizing that my wife encouraged this situation, pushing me into a position where I might eventually give in, all in the name of some twisted idea of an open marriage. This wasn't just about Sandra anymore. This was about my wife, the woman I trusted and loved, being complicit in something so disgusting. How could Kate allow Sandra to behave so inappropriately with me? I had never imagined that my own wife would be a part of this. However, as they continued talking, I became even more and more sure. At that moment, I couldn't take it anymore. My voice was shaking with fury as I walked out and confronted Kate, asking her if everything I had just overheard was true. Was she really complicit in allowing her best friend to harass me? Did she want me to sleep with her best friend while she was out of town? Was this what our marriage had been reduced to? The look on Kate's face was one I'll never forget. She went white as a ghost. Sandra too was wide-eyed, her expression frozen in shock, realizing she'd been caught in the act. Kate sputtered for a moment, clearly caught off guard, and then tried to explain that I wasn't supposed to hear their conversation and that she wanted me to calm down first. I firmly asked her to not lie anymore and just tell me the truth since I had pretty much heard everything, so there was no point hiding. This is when Kate started to say how she had wanted to talk to me about open marriage for quite some time, but that she was afraid to bring it up. At that point, I asked her directly if she really wanted an open marriage and if she really wanted to go out with other people. Kate's eyes darted toward Sandra before she nodded as if it was no big deal. My entire world crumbled at that moment. Kate was the love of my life. I had loved her and couldn't even imagine cheating on her. However, she clearly did not think of me that way. Without a second thought, I stormed upstairs and started throwing Kate's things into a suitcase, determined to make her leave along with Sandra. Kate and Sandra started screaming at me to stop, but I informed them that I had put up secret cameras in the living room and the kitchen for my protection. Cameras that recorded everything, including audio. As a result, I had proof of their sick plan, evidence of them conspiring against me and admitting to what they had done. I told Kate that since she wanted an open marriage, I no longer wanted to stay married to her. I wanted her to leave my house immediately along with Sandra. If either of them resisted, I would send the video to every single one of her family members and friends.